Good evening, RevvED community. My name is Edgar Palacios, and I'm the founder of Revolución Educativa, an organization that is working on building sustained collective power within our community around issues of education. I am joined this evening with my incredible colleagues, Christy Moreno and Trisha McGee. Christy, Trisha, how are you doing today?
You know, it's only Monday and it feels like Thursday. So that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I can second that sentiment for sure.
It has been an incredible 6 years in the last 2 weeks that we've lived through. And so I appreciate you all just taking a little bit of your evening time to talk about something that's also important, which is I hear that the nation's report card is out. And typically we reference that as the NAEP scores. Christy, what are the NAEP scores? What's NAEP?
Well, NAEP is the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and it's a nationwide assessment of student achievement in the U.S. Now, it's different from some of the state assessments that each states have. For example, in Missouri, there's the MAP test, and the NAEP test is not taken by every single student in the state. It's a sample of students in the state, so it's important to remember that. We've been hearing a lot in the last several years of people that are opposed to standardized testing. When we need to see and when we need to assess how public education is working in this country, we need to have those assessments to be able to, like we said, not just have these conversations, but set plans in action, push for policies and implementation that will actually help our students achieve and gain growth, and also just be ready for the next thing in life, whatever that may be. Unfortunately, we do not have great results for 2024, and I'll leave it at that for now. But we will be talking a bit about NAEP scores for Missouri and Kansas compared to the national grade card.
We are 4 years after COVID. COVID, we all know, was an incredible and huge disruption within the education community. We're seeing second graders now, kindergartners now, right? Young people who are post-pandemic. And what I'm hearing is that the scores are not where they need to be. The resources, the education quality is not where it needs to be. Are we seeing that in the scores themselves?
We are. NAEP's report cards come out every 2 years. So what we have to compare with are the 2022 results. And in general terms, we are declining as a nation. There's been very, very small gains in math. But I would like to tap into my friend here, Trisha, who's an expert in literacy. We know that if our kids are not reading at the most basic level, then learning can't happen, right? And that is where we see the lowest scores for NAEP. It assesses both math and reading. Math has made very, very little gains in some places, but we're extremely concerned about literacy, not only as a nation, but in each one of our localities and our states. We've been seeing a literacy crisis and decline in the last decade. And so with the NAEP scores, and I'm going to be giving you some data here in a moment, but I would like to hear from Trisha, because I know she's been doing a lot of advocacy around literacy. And if you want to chime in, what's the importance of literacy? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What do you think?
Yeah. So, Edgar, you asked how have test scores been doing since COVID. I have bad news for everyone. Our literacy scores were horrible before COVID, and they have not gotten better. In fact, our students that are the lowest performing, their scores are going down after COVID. But even before that, like Christy mentioned, our literacy scores in this entire country have been low for over a decade and declining. So we do know that 95% of students, if taught correctly, can learn to read and read on grade level. So that's the expectation I have. So once I see 95% of students on grade level or above, I'll be happy. But we're at, what are the numbers currently? 60%? Are below grade level. That the problem with quoting this data at you is because they come from so many different places. So sometimes we look at the NAEP and NAEP scores that Christy's discussing, that we're discussing today, the MAP testing, and then we have Missouri school improvement plans, which is a whole different system that we won't get into. but our children are nowhere near the levels of literacy that they should be and haven't for over a decade. And so we know that that number should be 95%. Our brains, 95% of our brains are capable of reading on grade level, and our students are not receiving the instruction they need.
What are the consequences of not being able to read on grade level? So let's say I'm a third grader. I don't read on grade level. At third grade, I don't make it to fourth grade reading at a third grade reading level. What does that mean for my future as a student?
More bad news. I don't want to be the one sharing bad news, but so those of us that work in education or education education have heard the K through 3 we're learning to read, and then third grade and beyond we're reading to learn. Every single subject we learn in after the third grade, we need reading skills that are strong. And so if you can't read well by the time you're in the third grade, then everything you learn afterwards, you're behind. You're struggling to make up. Your brain is in overdrive trying to understand all of the vocabulary that's typical for fourth grade science or eighth grade science or seventh grade math. Math problems have reading in them too. So it puts us behind everywhere. And then I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about the social emotional effects of feeling like you're behind and feeling like you're not smart enough, but that also impacts our young people as well.
Absolutely. And to answer your question, Edgar, I mean, when we are measuring reading levels for eighth graders and we know that they're very, very low, just think about their high school experience. High school experience is to prepare you for an independent life, to prepare you for success, to prepare you for the future, to prepare you for entrepreneurship or for higher education. And if our kids can't read fluently and proficiently and with comprehension skills and critical thinking skills and literary analysis skills, then what do we expect of their high school experience? And so that is very alarming. One of the things that is most alarming to me is that there has been an unprecedented federal investment post-COVID where $190 billion were put into these learning recovery for all public schools across the nation. And we're not even seeing tiny increases. What we're seeing is we're going back. And so it really begs the question of what are we doing and what can we do, right? And so I know, Edgar, you and I have been talking to our friends at the National Student Support Accelerator about high impact tutoring. And I do want to talk a little bit about that here in a moment. But I do think we need to share some of the stats that we're seeing for both Missouri and Kansas, and how that compares to the national level. I know that there's a handful of states that are actually doing good work. And that's very easy to find. You can just Google NAEP scores and it'll show you a map. The National Assessment Educational Progress, as well as the National Assessment Governing Board that oversees the program, has a really wonderful website that's easy to navigate. You can download the results per state. You can compare states. You can see maps. It's really cool for those of us administrators or people like us that are into this and that want to make sure our kids get quality education. I invite you to check it out.
So Christy, let me just say here for folks that are maybe not looking at budgets of districts or states, more of the same thing that's not working isn't working. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Spending all those millions and billions of dollars on a curriculum that's not based in science or not proven to help students learn to read well is not going to help our students. And now we have the proof of that.
Exactly.
I do, I think it's fascinating. First and foremost, I want to make sure that folks in our comment section, you'll see the link to the nation's report card, as well as we have a member of our community, Lucecita Ramos. Thank you for being here and joining us for this conversation on NAEP scores and the nation's report card. Listen, you know what? I keep hearing that we are spending more money in schools, and you're telling me that the results are the same, if not worse. So what's my motivation as a politician, as a national thought leader, for me to actually advocate for more resources and more dollars into our states? Because you're telling me it's not working.
Well, the number one thing we cannot do is get rid of the education department, right? And the education department is under attack this week. And so Trish and I will have an action this week, and we're going to be traveling because we cannot talk about improvement in education when we're also talking about doing away with the federal agency and institution that oversees, right? Not a lot of programs that oversees the quality of public education, that oversees and produces wonderful professional development for schools. And so that's my number one answer. But of course, we really need to look at, having high impact tutoring in schools and measuring that and making sure that that tutoring is actually high impact. It's also called high dosage in some areas. And that is consistent at least 3 times a week with the same tutor. It's based on a relationship. It's based on measuring progress and a variety of things. We also need to be closely monitoring students individually and their progress and their assessments, providing extended learning to give students more opportunities to catch up. Everybody has different learning styles, so making sure we know how our kids in our classrooms learn best. And quite frankly, supporting educators and school leaders to ensure that they're actually implementing high quality instruction, right? Do you have any thoughts, Trisha? Any ideas?
I was scribbling on my Post-it note because I don't want to lose point of this. Oftentimes when we talk about low test scores, folks ask, so you're saying it's the teacher's fault? So you're saying it's the school's fault? What we know to be true, because we're in a community with so many teachers, our teachers are talented and dedicated and wanting to show up for kids. What they're also is frustrated that a curriculum gets changed every other year. They don't get enough professional development time to implement it, or they have something that has been working for their specific students in their specific classroom, but then the state level requirements change or the district level requirements change. So that accountability piece and implementation of how we implement various programs varies so much district to district within a state and then from state to state. So as Christy mentioned, there are states that are doing well. And so how well a student is taught to read or learns to read should not depend on what state they live in. And so the federal oversight of all of our students here in the United States is really important. But we got to really be supporting our teachers so they have time to implement these new curriculums that frequently they didn't learn when they were going to school, because this issue of how we teach reading wrong has been since the late 80s. So we got to make sure that we're giving our talented folks time to implement these things at work.
I just want to say hello to Miriam Gonzalez. Hola, good to see you. Gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Listen, I'm hearing a lot of things. I'm a parent, all right, and I'm working 2 jobs. I'm trying to make sure that my 3 kids are fed and they have everything they need, and so I'm just relying on the education system to educate, right? What's my responsibility as a parent in this moment? What should I be doing? Because honestly, I don't have a lot of time.
Well, this information is accessible to everyone, but also if you have questions, you can always come to organizations like RevvED and we'll help you out figuring out. One of the things that we tell parents all the time during their parent-teacher conference is to ask the question, is my child reading on grade level? Is my child, how's their academics? Oftentimes what I hear, and also as an interpreter, I've heard in many of the parent-teacher conferences that I get to interpret, that oftentimes teachers are giving parents the comparative of how their kid is doing in their own classroom, not within their local school district, within their state, or within the national measure. And so if you tell me that in my classroom, my kid is in the top of the list, I'm going to think he's getting all A's, right? I'm going to think he's like a super fast reader, very proficient, can have critical and analytical skills. And I'm going to think that, but we're pushing parents to ask deeper, ask more meaningful questions that won't just give you the answer of oh, your kid is doing well, give it a pack up. Let's ask, what can I challenge my child with? How can I ensure that my child is growing at their capacity level, that they feel challenged? Oftentimes we hear students saying, I'm bored. Well, typically boredom is a lack of challenge, right? We have just settled in a comfort zone. Let's continue pushing our kids. One of the things that we see at a national level, and as I looked into the data for both the state of Missouri and Kansas, is that the achievement gap is widening, right? So you see students that are in the 75th percentile or higher, and they're doing better. Some of their NAEP scores are higher. But then we look at those that are doing below 25%, and that's the number that's alarming and that's growing. And we know that that's where the work of equity comes into play, right? One of the things I do want to mention at a national level, only 29% of 8th graders are proficient in reading. This is the measure that I was looking for here a second ago when I was talking about when they move into or graduate and access high school. 29% of our 8th graders are proficient in reading, and proficient really means a basic level. It means that they are proficient enough to move up to the next level, right? It doesn't mean that they're stellar. It doesn't mean that they are where they need to be. So that's very important. And at a national level, 40% of 4th graders, remember NAEP measures 4th grade and 8th grade, 40% of 4th graders are below basic in reading. Below basic, it's not even basic. So we have a lot of things to work on. And when it comes to our local region here, Missouri and Kansas, well, I can tell you that we're no better.
I want to circle back to a couple things, especially for the parents that are listening, Edgar, because that's how you pose the question. And so I'm ready. 2 really important things to think about. Your child getting an A in a class does not mean that they are reading on grade level or that they're at math on grade level. Those are 2 different measurements. So your child doing their homework on time, getting along with classmates and doing assignments and participating in projects, those are all different things about learning and important. So it's possible, and I have seen in our household, to get an A in a class and still be reading below grade level. So you must ask more than one question. What brings my student joy? What are their strengths? What are their talents? What are their grades? But are they on grade level in math? Are they on grade level in reading? And why not? What can I do? So you really have to drill down with those specific types of questions. And then I think, and shout out to Miriam, who I saw was watching, I have heard her say so many times that as parents, we have many, many rights, but we also have responsibilities. So to go back to your question about what parents can be doing, if you're a bilingual parent, be reading to your Spanish or be reading to your student in whatever language you're stronger in, or read to them in both. Maintain that bilingualism at home, maintain that first or second language that you may have. But also, a lot of people teach their kids to read. We've met with so many community members that are getting printed off sheets from their aunt that still lives in Venezuela, and they're emailing them little like worksheets on how they can be teaching their kids at home as well. Yes, our public school systems are a public good and we want to hold them accountable, but we can also help teach our kids to be reading at home, and many, many parents do.
I appreciate you sharing that, because to me, this is a core belief of mine, is that education isn't solely the responsibility of a school district, right? It is a community responsibility, which means it takes all of us. It takes parents, it takes allies, it takes teachers, it takes administrators to come together to make sure that we're creating the conditions necessary to ensure that our young people are having the best educational outcomes and experiences. But listen, y'all, like, these are numbers, they shift. There's so many other things in the state of Missouri. I'm not sure if you're aware, but DEI is under attack. There's huge anti-immigrant sentiment. So particularly for the community that we serve, in addition to like trying to go to school and learn and feel safe, there's also all this other pressure around what that safety means for them, right? And so what are the social emotional impacts of this, right? Now, I can't read, and I'm also anxious all the time. Like, what does that mean for me as a young person?
I appreciate that, especially when we know bullying and cyberbullying and harassment is really high and has been. However, I do want to mention that this is a trend we've been seeing over the last decade. So while we know that data shifts year to year, every 2 years that the NAEP, the report card comes out, we do have access, and anyone has access to that information if you visit that site, to actually see the trends, right? And so I think social emotional curricula is extremely important. And I think absolutely it has to be paired with the academic expectations. And what we see is that when SEL is implemented properly, it also increases not just the psychological safety of the student, but ultimately what this comes down to is relationships. We know that relationships within the school building, relationships between school and home, are really the pathway to success. And so my question is, how are we really looking at building strong relationships with our students and with our parents, for those administrators and educators? For administrators, how are you building solid relationship with your educators and your staff? because we know that when people feel that strong sense of belonging, that strong sense of support, that strong sense of mattering, of having a voice, of visibility, then every boat rises, right? And so that is the question that I pose with regards to social emotional learning, because it's not just for our students, it's for everyone in the building.
I could add so much. I just want to uplift. Christy, you mentioned 28% of 8th graders are below basic in reading on the NAEP stores. I just want everyone to think about, put yourself in the shoes of an 8th grader. I have an 8th grader at home. If you have one or you know one, a neighbor, friend, whoever. And if you're struggling to consume 8th grade level content, and you're not having a great day because of either national politics or your best friend no longer wants to talk to you, or whatever it is that you're struggling with as a 13-year-old, that will affect your engagement in the classroom as well. And so one thing I think that folks maybe don't realize is connected to DEI, the social emotional learning lens. Plus, like, why is a student maybe have a bad attitude? If you're a teacher all of a sudden and a student comes in with a bad attitude, or maybe they have all year because they've been struggling to read for years, and then on top of that, they're being bullied, or on top of that, there's political pressures that are making things worse. Teachers also disengage, because if a student has a bad attitude or doesn't want to talk to you, it can be really hard to engage with that. So it's like it snowballs into bigger things. And so DEI also prompts both systems and individuals to look at why they're making assumptions about a student based on interactions with them or the behavior that student displays. And so I fear that if we get rid of all DEI initiatives, that we won't have that push both on individuals and on systems to dig deeper into why a student might be struggling or having behaviors that are not quote unquote welcome in the classroom.
To that point, I think those issues will be exacerbated if we lose the Department of Education, right? You're looking at all the title funding that comes along with that. You're looking at all, I assume, the Office of Civil Rights and the complaints associated with that. And also, we have to understand that Missouri, from as far as I understand, is not a well-funded state when it comes to education. And so those federal supports are necessary. And if we lose that Department of Education and we lose those funds, we're going to see these inequities continue to grow, and that achievement gap is going to continue to widen because we don't actually have the supports necessary in place. We have Miriam here commenting, qué importante es tener este tipo de información y recordar que debemos ser los primeros maestros en casa la mayor posibilidad posible. This is important. How important it is to have access to this information, and a reminder that parents are the first, maybe primary educators at home. And another comment, los maestros deberían tener más información sobre inteligencia emocional para poder identificar las señales emocionales de los estudiantes y actuar adecuadamente, así como los padres en casa. So it's important for educators to have the best practices around social emotional behaviors and practices to make sure that students are learning adequately, right? Like that we're making sure that the information, but just the experience is also an adequate one for our young people as well.
And so here, if I may, here is where the danger in getting rid of a federal level Department of Education is. If my state, Missouri, or wherever you live, decides that social emotional learning is no longer important, they don't fund that, they pass policies saying we don't have to teach it, and it will highly affect my students' learning or your students in your classroom's learning, which is why we do need to have some requirements at the national level.
Absolutely. I am dying to share some data points with you guys. I have my Post-it notes here ready to share.
Let's hear it.
Now, it is important that I say that the national average, when I'm looking at Missouri and Kansas, is not great. So when you see a number that differs only by 2 points, it's not great because the national average is terrible. Okay. So let's talk about, do you want to do Kansas or Missouri first, real quick?
Let's do Kansas.
Let's do Kansas. 22% of students in the state of Kansas are Latino. Did you know that? That's a high number.
I had an inkling, but 22% seems right. Yeah.
We have 11% of fourth graders in Kansas are English language learners, and only 5% of eighth graders in Kansas are English language learners. Okay, so let's talk about scores in Kansas for fourth graders. In math, we actually went up by 2 points in the last 2 years. We were at 235, we're at 237. The national average is 237. I'm not celebrating this. I'm just saying that Kansas is in the national average, which is alarming. For fourth grade reading, the national average is 214. Kansas in 2024 measured 213 points. And unfortunately, 213 is down from the scores that we had in 2022, which were 215. So we're seeing this trend of everything reading, everything comprehension, all of that is going down. Now, for eighth graders in Kansas, the national average in math is 272. Kansas students scored 274, eighth graders in math, 2 points above the national average. And in reading, we are 2 points below the national average of 257. So in 2024, students scored 255 points for reading in the state of Kansas. Now, I'm going to go to the state of Missouri. The state of Missouri has fewer Latino students. Can you kind of guess what number? If it's fewer than, what did I say, 22%?
I'll say 16%.
It's half of that. It's actually 8%. We only have 8% of students in the state of Kansas identify as Latino. For fourth grade, 5% of them are English learners. For eighth grade, 4% of them are English learners. Okay, so the national average for fourth graders in math is 237. Missouri scored 235 points, which again is a growth of 2 points from 2022. Very minimal. It should be much more. Fourth graders in Missouri are reading at the score is 212, which is actually lower than 2 years ago, and it's lower than the national average of 214. And for eighth graders in Missouri, eighth graders scored at 270 points for 2024, which is down by 2 numbers from 2022. And the national average is 272, so below the national average. And lastly, for reading, eighth graders in Missouri scored 255 points. It's below 2 points, so the national average is 257. And unfortunately, it is also lower than it was 2 years ago. In 2022, eighth graders were reading at 258 points. We're down by 3 points. And points are not just a 1 point difference. Every point marks a lot. So all this to say, we are not doing what's best for our kids. It is important that we continue to have these assessments at a national level because it's a really good read on where our kids are and where they need to be, and also what are we doing that is not great, right? The tool by the NAEP, you can actually segregate data, you can look at demographics, you can really focus on the percentile. So what is the gap and where does it sit? If you want to spend some time playing with it, go ahead. But ultimately, what we're seeing is very alarming. What we're seeing is that not even with $190 billion investment, we're doing what is right by our kids. So, and what do we believe in? We believe in relationships. We believe in high impact tutoring. We believe in ensuring that every student has an individualized education plan so that we can identify how our kids learn best. And really making sure that we are setting them up for success.
I just want to add one more thing for those of you that are listening to these numbers. These are on a scale of 500. So when Chrissy says 235, 240 out of 500, that's less than 50%. So if you grew up here in the United States, a 50% is still an F. So depends on where you grew up and what your scale ratings were. And so I just really want to uplift that these numbers do not look great nationwide. And every child has the ability to learn to read and learn to do well in school and has the right to receive that. So we need to keep pushing.
I do have a question. Do we know what states are actually doing this well? Do we know what states can we look to as Missourians and Kansans to ensure that we're demanding for the quality of education that we desire?
For sure. There's a handful of states. There's like 5 or 7 of them. And you can see it in the map on that website. Maryland, Tennessee, Florida, Colorado. I'm missing a couple. I think
Indiana, I think.
Maybe Rhode Island was up there too. But when you look at what they're doing high impact tutoring. They're spending more time in quality curriculum. They're teaching kids how to read and write, adequately and with evidence-based curricula. And they're building relationships with families. And so they're really seeing this as a team approach. And you can see the results there that pays, it pays back when you invest in the right programs.
I think about we're in legislative session at the moment in Missouri, of course, in the state of Kansas as well. And, we're having a lot of these conversations around what is the future of Missouri look like, right? And people get really invested and interested in workforce development and economic development. But I think that some people forget that it starts in schools, right? If we don't have an educated populace, if we're not investing in our young people, then that's the workers of the future, the leaders of the future. And so how do we create more urgency in this moment? And as people will say, we demand better for our young people, right? This is our future that we're talking about. And if our future can't read, if they can't do basic math, then what do we expect the state of Missouri and the state of Kansas to look like in terms of the opportunities it's able to offer the people who live there?
Yeah. I have the same question.
Yeah. I think everyone decides how they want to share this information with friends and family members. I have a tote bag that Edgar thinks is horrifically designed, but walks around reminding people that our kids can't read. 70% of students in Missouri can't read my tote bag. We need to be talking to our friends about it. It's not just professionals in education. It's not just teachers. It's not just legislators. Public education is one of the very few public services that we still receive as a nation. And so we want it to be a good one. It affects everyone.
Yeah, and I think this is also for me a prioritization of issues, right? I think we've seen a lot of efforts also around banning books and all these things. And my question is if you can't read the books anyways, isn't that more criminal? Right? If you're not able to digest the information, wrestle with the text, understand and think about the distance, all the other stuff, does it really matter if we're banning books if the kids can't read them anyway? And that to me is a bigger call to action. We must make sure that our young people are literate, that they're able to read, not just on grade level, maybe ahead of grade level. So they're not behind in life.
Absolutely. And just as we wrap up this conversation, this is a perfect time to do a commercial for the Literacy Council that meets at the LEC/RevvED space in partnership with Read 360. Our next meeting is tomorrow. Let's see if the weather doesn't get in the way of that. But our next meeting is tomorrow. It's a place for parents and caregivers and educators and community members to come together and support the literacy, both in English and in Spanish or any other language that you speak at home, with our kids in mind, and sharing practical and evidence-based approaches so that we can support our kids' learning.
That starts tomorrow at 5:30 and it'll run till about 7. So links to sign up are all over all of our social media platforms. I also do want to give a shout out to one of our team members that leads our digital literacy classes and programming. Sebastian is available. If you want to go deep dive into this data, but you're looking at the website and it's a little off-putting, reach out. You can come in. We have open office hours that can help some of you. All of us need a little bit of extra help sometimes when we're looking at these really fancy websites with the data. So reach out and we can connect you.
Well, I really appreciate both of your efforts and one, sharing this information, but two, digesting it, making it easily digestible for us. And I know that your commitment to this work doesn't just end with this conversation today, but there's a lot of behind the scenes efforts that we are engaging as an organization. There's a lot of front of scene efforts that we're doing to ensure that these scores are on the up and up, and that we're not just being critical friends, but we're also being supportive friends to those that are genuinely interested in making sure that our young people have better educational outcomes and experiences. And so, Christy, Tricia, thank you so much for your time. And community, thank you so much for engaging with us this afternoon. We'll continue to host programs like this throughout the year. And so make sure to follow us on all of our socials at RevvEDKC, RevvEDKC. You'll find us on Instagram. You'll find us on
Substack, you'll find us on Substack now.
Substack.
Get excited for that.
So feel free to continue to engage with us. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out. Appreciate you all and have an excellent rest of your evening. Thank you all.
Thank you.